host Tara. Thank you for the host Oscar. I hope that you're lurking with your Zoom class, that I'm not too distracting for you. How's it going, guys? I'm pretty excited to be here. It is today. Today is the day. 4 years ago on April 13th, 2016, I decided, you know what, I'm going to try to stream a Nancy Drew game and see how it goes. And I had so much fun with it, I never looked back. So we are here today because 4 years ago I decided to stream Secrets Can Kill Remastered. And, you know, the rest is history, as they say. So yes, magic began. I'm really excited to have said that 4 years of streaming, I've made so many wonderful friends. That means so much to me. You guys are so dear to me. And I appreciate and love every single one of you. That being said, we are starting a 12-hour stream. So it's 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to go till 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Or maybe a little after, depending on how we are and where we are in the game that will finish us out, which is going to be Blackmore Manor. Aren't you looking back to it right now? Yeah, I'm reflecting, but I'm not regretting. There's a difference. So the first thing I'm going to do is read the first third of The Secret of the Old Clock book, which is the next one in our lineup of Nancy Drew books. So this is the book that came out in 1930. However, I am reading the revised version, which I think is from 1956. They had updated most of the 1930 stories in the 50s, so this is the 1956 version of the 1930 book. Technicalities, I know. So, let me know if the music is a problem. I'm going to move my mic. I apologize for any weird noises. Thank you for shouting out Oscar. Definitely deserves it. One day we'll get some Oscar streams again and it'll be magic. Okay, I have my coffee. I'm going to take a sip of it and we're going to jump right in. Also, actually I want to say two quick things real quick. One, I plan to stay live as long as possible. I don't want to break up the segments. I will just highlight them later for easy uploading to YouTube. Second thing is, I am in the middle of a bad storm today. It will be here until about 11:30. If I do cut out, it is probably because I've lost either internet or power or both. I'll be back online as soon as I'm able to. I think the worst of it has passed. I actually had a tornado scare this morning, which I've never dealt with in my life, but a tornado passed like 1 mile north of me. It was scary there for a minute. But anyway, so if I do blip out, it'll probably be because of that. Yeah. 11:30 a.m., sorry. So in about 2.5 hours, all of the storms should be gone. But I think the worst of them is already gone. And yeah, I'm just going to stay live for 12 hours is the goal, and I will just make highlights later so that I can upload those highlights to YouTube. That's kind of my plan. All right, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. The Secret of the Old Clock by Carolyn Keene. And there is a picture. It says, "The Crowley clock at last!" Nancy exclaimed. Okay. We're going to read 6 chapters today. Chapter 1, The Rescue. Nancy Drew, an attractive girl of 18, was driving home along a country road in her new dark blue convertible. She had just delivered some legal papers for her father. It was sweet of Dad to give me this car for my birthday, she thought, and it's fun to help him in his work. Her father, Carson Drew, a well-known lawyer in their hometown of River Heights, frequently discussed puzzling aspects of cases with his blonde, blue-eyed daughter. Smiling, Nancy said to herself, "Dad depends on my intuition." An instant later, she gasped in horror. From the lawn of a house just ahead of her, a little girl about 5 years of age had darted into the roadway. A van, turning out of the driveway of the house, was barely 50 feet away from her. As the driver vigorously sounded the horn in warning, the child became confused and ran directly in front of the van. Miraculously, the little girl managed to cross the road safely and pull herself up onto a low wall, which formed one side of a bridge. But the next second, as the van sped away, the child lost her balance and toppled off the wall out of sight. Oh no. "Oh my goodness!" Nancy cried out, slamming on her brakes. She had visions of the child plunging into the water below, perhaps striking her head fatally on a rock. Nancy leapt out of her car and dashed across the road. At the foot of the embankment, she could see the curly-haired little girl lying motionless, the right side of her body in the water. "I hope..." Nancy dared not complete her harrowing thought as she climbed down the steep slope. When she reached the child, she saw to her great relief that the little girl was breathing normally and no water had entered her nose or mouth. A quick examination showed she'd suffered no broken bones. Gently, Nancy lifted the little girl and, holding her firmly in both arms, struggled to the top of the embankment. Then she hurried across the road and up the driveway to the child's house. At this moment, the front door flew open and an elderly woman rushed out crying, "Judy! Judy!" "I'm sure she'll be all right," Nancy said quickly. The woman, seeing Nancy's car, asked excitedly, "Did you run into her?" No, Judy fell off the bridge." Nancy quickly explained what had taken place. This time, another woman, slightly younger, had hurried from the house. "Our baby! What's happened to her?" As the woman reached out to take Judy, Nancy said soothingly, "Judy's gonna be all right. I'll carry her into the house and lay her on a couch." One of the women opened the screen door and the other directed, "This way." Nancy carried her little burden through the hallway and into a small, old-fashioned living room. As soon as she laid the child on the couch, Judy began to murmur and turn her head from side to side. "I believe she'll come to in a few minutes," said Nancy. The two women watched Judy intently as they introduced themselves as Edna and Mary Turner, great aunts of the little girl. "Judy lives with us," explained Edna, the older sister. "We're bringing her up." Nancy was somewhat surprised to hear that these elderly women were rearing such a small child. She gave her name and address just as Judy opened her eyes and looked around. Seeing Nancy, she asked, "Who are you?" "My name is Nancy. I'm glad to know you, Judy." "Did you see me fall?" Nancy nodded as the child's Aunt Mary said, "She rescued you from the river after you fell in." Judy began to cry. "I'll never, never run into the road again. Really, I won't," she told her aunts. Nancy said she was sure that Judy never would. She patted the child, who smiled up at her. Although Nancy felt that Judy would be all right, she decided to stay a few minutes longer to see if she could be of help. The child's wet clothes were removed and a robe put on her. Mary Turner started for the kitchen door. "I'd better get some medication and wet compresses for Judy. She's getting a good-sized lump on her head. Nancy, will you come with me?" She led the way to the kitchen and headed for a first aid cabinet which hung on the wall. "I want to apologize to you, Nancy, for thinking you hit Judy," the woman said. "I guess Edna and I lost our heads. You see, Judy is very precious to us. We brought up her mother, who'd been an only child and was orphaned when she was a little girl. The same thing has now happened to Judy. Her parents were killed in a boat explosion 3 years ago. The poor little girl has no close relatives except Edna and me." "Judy looks very healthy and happy," Nancy said quickly, "so I'm sure she must love it here." Mary smiled. "We do the best we can on our small income. Sometimes it just doesn't suffice, though. We sold some old furniture to the 2 men in that van you saw. I don't know who they were, but I guess the price was all right." Mary Turner's thoughts went back to little Judy. "She's so little now that Edna and I are able to manage with our small income, but we worry about the future. We're dressmakers, but our fingers aren't so nimble with the needle as they used to be. To tell you the truth, Nancy, at the time Judy's parents were killed, Edna and I wondered whether we'd be able to take care of Judy properly. But we decided to try it, and now we wouldn't part with her for anything in the world. She's won our hearts completely." Nancy was touched by the story. She knew what was in the mind of the Turner sisters. Living costs would become higher, and with their advancing years, their own income would become lower. "Unfortunately," Mary went on, "Judy's parents left very little money. But they were extremely bright people, and Judy's going to be like them. She ought to study music and dancing and have a college education, but I'm afraid we'll never be able to give her those things." One moment, please. Nancy said reassuringly, "Judy may be able to win a scholarship or get other financial aid." Mary, finding Nancy a sympathetic listener, continued, "A cousin of our father's named Josiah Crowley used to help us, but he passed away a couple of months ago. For years he used to pay us long visits and was very generous with his money." Miss Turner sighed. "He always promised to remember us in his will. He loved little Judy, and I'm afraid Edna and I came to depend on that in our plans for her. But he did not carry out on his promise." Nancy smiled understandingly and made no comment, but she did wonder why Mr. Crowley had changed his mind. "Josiah went to live with some other cousins. After that, things changed. He rarely came to see us, but he was here just last February and said the same thing, that Edna and I were to inherit money from him. He had always helped us, and it seemed strange that he should stop so suddenly." Mary Turner looked at Nancy. "Maybe you know our well-to-do cousins that he went to stay with. They live in River Heights. They're the Richard Tophams." "Do they have 2 daughters named Ada and Isabel?" Nancy asked. "If so, I know them." "That's the family, all right," replied Mary. Nancy detected a hint of coolness in the woman's voice. "Do you like those 2 girls?" Miss Turner asked. Nancy did not answer at once. She had been taught never to gossip, but finally she said tactfully, "Ada and Isabel were in high school with me. They were never my close friends. We, don't see eye to eye on various things." By this time, Mary Turner had selected a few items from the first aid chest. Now she went to the refrigerator for some ice cubes. As she arranged the various articles on a tray, she said, "Well, when Cousin Josiah passed away, to our amazement, Richard Topham produced a will which made him executor of the Crowley estate and left all the money to him, his wife, and his 2 girls." "Yes, I did read that in the newspaper," Nancy recalled. "Is the estate a large one?" "I understand there's considerable money in it," Mary Turner replied. Some of Josiah's other cousins said he told them the same thing he told us, and they're planning to go to court about the matter." The woman shrugged. "But I guess a fight to break the will would be hopeless. Nevertheless, Edna and I cannot help feeling there must be a later will, although as yet no one's presented it." Nancy followed Miss Turner into the living room. The cold compresses helped to reduce the swelling where Judy had hit her head on the rock. Convinced now that the little girl was all right, Nancy said she must leave. "Come to see me again soon," Judy spoke up. "I like you, Nancy. You're my saving girl." "You bet I'll come," Nancy answered. "I like you too. You're a good sport." The child's great aunts profusely thanked Nancy again for rescuing Judy. The visitor had barely reached the door when Edna suddenly said, "Mary, where's our silver teapot?" "Why, right there on the tea table. Oh, it's gone!" Edna ran into the dining room. "The silver candlesticks! They're gone too!" Nancy had paused in the doorway, startled. "You mean the pieces have been stolen?" she asked. "Well, they must have been," replied Mary Turner, who was white with apprehension, "by those men who bought those furniture from us." Instantly, Nancy thought of the men in the van. "Who were those men?" she asked. "Oh, Mary, how could we have been so careless?" Edna Turner wailed. "We don't know who the men were. They just knocked on the door, asked if we had any old furniture we wanted to sell. We'll never get that silver back." "Maybe you will," said Nancy. "I'll call the police." "Oh, dear," Mary said woefully. "Our phone is out of order." "Then I'll try to catch up to that van," Nancy declared. "What did those men look like?" "They were short and heavy-set. One had dark hair, the other light. They had kind of large noses. That's about all I noticed." "Me too," said Edna. And with a hasty goodbye, Nancy dashed from the house and ran to her car. That's the end of chapter 1. Let me catch up. Attractive girl. That's subjective, not factual book. No, I guess you're kind of right. I know there's like some like qualities that I think are always going to be like attractive depending on like your culture, I guess. But I think typically attractiveness is subjective, yeah. Nancy, medical pro. You whacked her with your card. I said card. Whack! Like a playing card. Good morning, Disney. Thank you for shouting him out. This is the day I decided to stream 4 years ago. Judy loves it so much she jumps into rivers. Reincarnated AWOL sisters. Thank you so much for those 10 bits, Disney, by the way. I appreciate that. Yeah, I just started. Yes, thank you for posting the breakdown. Hey, Elaine, how's it going? Thank you for shouting out, Elaine. Oh, thank you. Riddy made this for me. She sent this to me for Christmas. She drew this and had it printed on a t-shirt and sent it to me for Christmas. Isn't that so sweet? I love it. I'm glad that it's going so well. Did you finish Deadly Device last night? Shoutouts to Riddy, just in case. I hope I can get through 6 chapters in 2 hours. I'm pretty sure I can. That's only 60 pages. Aw, yeah, get that dance emote. My boss texted me in the middle of that chapter, which is why I had to respond. Okay, I'm gonna jump into chapter 2, and I will be back with you at the end of that. Hopefully you guys are hanging in okay, and nobody said anything that the music's bad, so I'm assuming it's good. Oh, why did it stop? What the heck? Why'd the music stop? Scroll, scroll, scroll. Okay. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you. 12 hour. Can't talk. Exactly. Yes, 4 years ago today. Now my sister's texting me. Everybody wants me when I'm doing something. Yeah, 4 years ago today, I decided to stream Secrets Can Kill Remastered, and here we are now. Don't they know what day it is? I know. Okay, now we're gonna read chapter 2. Okay, here we go. Chapter 2, A Missing Will. The blue convertible sped along the country road. Nancy smiled grimly. I'm afraid I'm exceeding the speed limit, she thought, but I almost wish a trooper would stop me. Then I could tell him what happened to the poor Turner sisters. Nancy watched the tire marks which the van driven by the thieves had evidently made in the dirt road, but a few miles farther on a feeling of dismay came over her. She'd reached a V-shaped intersection of 2 highways. Both roads were paved, and since no tire impressions could be seen, Nancy did not know which highway the thieves had taken. Oh dear, she sighed. Now what shall I do? Nancy concluded that her wisest move would be to take the road which led to River Heights. There was a state police barracks just a few miles ahead. I'll stop there and report the theft. She kept looking for the van which she recalled as charcoal gray. I wish I'd seen the license number or the name of the firm that owns that van, Nancy said to herself ruefully. When she reached State Police Headquarters, Nancy introduced herself to Captain Runcie and told about the robbery, giving what meager information she could about the suspects. The officer promised to send out an alarm immediately for the thieves and their charcoal gray moving van. Nancy continued her journey home, thinking of the Turners and their problems. I wonder why Mr. Josiah Crowley left all his money to the Tophams and none to his other relatives. Why did he change his mind? Those Tophams are well-to-do and they don't need that money as much as the Turners. Nancy did not know Richard Topham, but she was acquainted with his wife, as well as his daughters. They were arrogant and unreasonable, and disliked by many of the shopkeepers in town. Ada and Isabel had been unpopular in high school. They had talked incessantly of money and social position, making themselves very obnoxious to the other students. I wonder, Nancy thought, if a way can't be found so the Turners could get a share of the Crowley money. I'll ask Dad. 5 minutes later, Nancy pulled into the double garage and hurried across the lawn to the kitchen door of the Drews' large red brick house. The building stood well back from the street and was surrounded by tall, beautiful trees. "Hello, Nancy," greeted the pleasant, slightly plump woman who opened the door. She was Hannah Gruen, housekeeper for the Drews, who had helped rear Nancy since the death of the girl's own mother many years before. Nancy gave her a hug and asked, "Dad home? I see his car's in the garage." "Your father's in the living room, and dinner will be ready in a few minutes." Nancy went to say hello to her tall, handsome father, then hurried to wash her hands and comb her hair before the three who formed the Drew household sat down to dinner. During the meal, Nancy related her adventure of the afternoon. "What tricky thieves!" Hannah Gruen burst out. "Oh, I hope the police capture them." "They certainly took advantage of those Turner sisters," Mr. Drew commented. "Mary and Edna are in financial difficulties," Nancy commented. "Isn't it a shame that Josiah Crowley didn't bequeath some of his estate to the Turners and other relatives who need that money?" Carson Drew smiled affectionately at his only child, then said, "Yes, it is, Nancy, but unless a will written later turns up, that's the way it has to be." "The Turners think there is another will," Nancy told him. "Wouldn't that be wonderful if it could be found?" "I agree," spoke up Hannah. "It's well known in town that Mrs. Topham and her daughters were unkind to Josiah Crowley for some time before he died. Their excuse was that Josiah's eccentricities were extremely trying." "The Tophams have never been noted for any charitable inclinations," Mr. Drew observed with a smile. "However, they did give Josiah a home." "Only because they knew he was going to leave all his money to them," said Hannah. "If I'd been Josiah, I wouldn't have stayed there." The housekeeper sighed. "But when people get old, they don't like change, and probably he put up with things rather than move." She said the treatment the Tophams had accorded old Josiah Crowley had aroused a great deal of unfavorable comment throughout River Heights. Nancy had not known him personally, but she'd often seen the elderly man on the street. Secretly, she had regarded him as a rather nice, kindly person. His wife had died during an influenza epidemic, and after that he made his home with various relatives. According to rumors, all these people had admitted that he had paid his board and done many favors for them. They in turn had been very kind to him, and though poor themselves, had tried to make Josiah Crowley comfortable and happy. "Tell me everything you know about Mr. Crowley," Nancy urged her father. The lawyer said that the old man had publicly declared he intended to provide in his will for several deserving relatives and friends. Then, 3 years before his death, the Topham family, who had never shown an interest in him, had experienced a sudden change of heart. They had begged Josiah Crowley to make his home with them, and at last he had consented. Shortly after he moved into the Topham house, Mr. Drew was told that the old man had decided to leave all his money to them. Mr. Crowley, though failing in health, maintained a firm grip on life. But as time went on, he became more and more unhappy. He continued to live with the Tophams, but it was whispered about that he frequently slipped away to visit his other relatives and friends, and that he intended to change his will again. "Then there must be a later will," Nancy said hopefully. Mr. Drew nodded and went on. "One day, Josiah Crowley became critically ill. Just before his death, he attempted to communicate something to the doctor who attended him, but his words, other than will, were unintelligible. After the funeral, the only one will came to light, giving the entire fortune to the Tophams." "Dad, do you suppose Mr. Crowley was trying to tell the doctor something about another will, which he had put someplace where the Tophams couldn't find it?" Nancy asked. "Very likely," the lawyer replied. "Probably he intended to leave his money to relatives who'd been kind to him, but fate cheated him of that opportunity." "Do you think anybody has looked for another will?" Nancy questioned. "I don't know, but I'm sure of this. If another will shows up, Richard Topham will fight it. The estate is a considerable one, I understand, and they aren't the kind of people to share good fortune." "Can't the present will be contested?" Nancy asked. "I hear that other relatives have filed a claim, declaring they were told another will had been made in their favor, but unless it's located, I doubt the matter will ever go further." "But the Tophams don't deserve that fortune," Hannah Gruen remarked. "And besides, they don't need the money. It doesn't seem fair." "It may not seem fair, but it is legal," Mr. Drew told her, "and I'm afraid nothing can be done about the situation." "Poor Judy and her aunts," said Nancy. "There are others affected in the same way," her father remarked. For instance, 2 young women who live on the River Road. I don't know their names, but I understand they were not related to Mr. Crowley, just great favorites of his. They're having a struggle and could use some extra money. Nancy lapsed into silence. She felt strongly that a mystery lurked behind the Crowley case. Dad, don't you believe Josiah Crowley made a second will? Nancy questioned suddenly. You sound like a trial lawyer the way you cross-examined me, Mr. Drew protested, but with evident enjoyment. To tell the truth, Nancy, I don't know what to think, but something did happen which might indicate that Mr. Crowley at least intended to make another will. Please go on, Nancy begged impatiently. Well, one day nearly a year ago, I was in the First National Bank when Crowley came in with Henry Rolstead. The attorney who specializes in wills and other estate matters? Nancy inquired. Yes. I had no intention of listening to their conversation, but I couldn't help overhearing a few words that made me think they were discussing a will. Crowley made an appointment to call at Rolstead's office the following day. Oh, cried Nancy excitedly. That looks as though Mr. Crowley had made a new will, doesn't it? But why didn't Mr. Rolstead say something about it at the time of Mr. Crowley's death? For one of many reasons, Mr. Drew replied. In the first place, he may have never drawn a new will for Mr. Crowley. And even if he had, the old man might have changed his mind and torn it up. Before Nancy spoke again, she finished the delicious apple pudding which Hannah had made. That sounds good. Then she looked thoughtfully at her father. Dad, Mr. Rolstead's an old friend of yours, isn't he? Yes, an old friend and college classmate. Won't you please ask him if he ever drew up a will for Mr. Crowley or knows anything that might solve that mystery? That's a rather delicate question, young lady. He may tell me it's none of my business. You know he won't. You're such good friends, he'll understand why you're taking a special interest in this case. Will you do it, please? I know you like to help people who are in trouble, her father said. I suppose I could invite Mr. Rolstead to have lunch with me tomorrow. Wonderful, Nancy interrupted eagerly. That would be a splendid opportunity to find out what he knows about a later will. All right, I'll try to arrange a date. How about joining us? Nancy's face lighted up as she said, Oh, thank you, Dad, I'd love to. I hope it can be tomorrow so we don't have to waste any time trying to find another will. Mr. Drew smiled. We, he said. You mean you might try to find a hidden will if Mr. Crowley wrote one? I might. Nancy's eyes sparkled in anticipation. That's the end of chapter 2. They should just do what I do to find out what day it is. Upon waking up my window and yell, open my window and yell, regardless of the person's gender, You there, boy! What day is this? Maybe Nancy actually hit Josiah with her car, just like she did with Jude. When are we getting to mini golf in this book? I want to hear this ghostwriter write a whole overly detailed chapter about a subject that ghostwriters sort of knew about. Hi, Christy. Thank you so much. Nancy, Mr. Carson Drew. Hi, Coley. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys for showing up. Hope you're both doing well. Thank you for the claps. 4 years ago today. Thank you for shouting out Christy. And thank you for shouting out Coley. Wouldn't want to be anywhere else. Aw, thanks, Disney. I appreciate it. It kind of stopped raining for a minute. This is my favorite song, In Danger by Design. Okay, I guess we'll move on to chapter 3. Chapter 3, An Unpleasant Meeting. What are your plans for this morning, Nancy? Her father asked at the breakfast table. I thought I'd do a little shopping, she replied. Her eyes twinkled. There's a dance coming up at the country club, and I'd like to get a new dress. Then will you phone me about lunch, or better still, how about eating with me, whether Mr. Rolstead comes or not? I'll be there, Nancy declared gaily. All right, drop in at my office about 12:30. If Mr. Rolstead does accept my invitation, we'll try to find out something about Josiah Crowley's wills. Mr. Drew pushed back his chair. I must hurry now or I'll be late getting downtown. After her father had left, Nancy finished her breakfast, then went to the kitchen to help Hannah Gruen, who'd already left the table. Any errands for me? Nancy asked. Yes, dear, here's a list, the housekeeper replied, and good luck with your detective work. Hannah Gruen gazed at the girl affectionately, and several thoughts raced through her mind. In school, Nancy had been very popular and had made many friends. But through no fault of her own, she'd made two enemies, Ada and Isabel Topham. This worried Hannah. The sisters, intensely jealous of Nancy, had tried to discredit her in positions she had held in school, but loyal friends had always sprung to Nancy's defense. As a result, Ada and Isabel had become more unpleasant than ever to Nancy. Thanks for your encouragement, she said to Hannah a little later, giving her a hug. Whatever you do, Nancy, beware of those Topham sisters. They'd only be too happy to make things difficult for you. I promise to be on my guard. Before leaving the house, Nancy phoned the Turners. She was glad to hear that Judy had suffered no ill effects from her fall, but she was disappointed that the police had found no clue to the thieves who'd stolen the silverware. Please let me know if you learn anything, Nancy said, and Edna promised to do so. Becomingly dressed in a tan cotton suit, Nancy set off in her convertible for the shopping district. She drove down the boulevard and upon reaching the more congested streets, made her way skillfully through heavy traffic, then pulled into a parking lot. I think I'll try Taylor's department store first for a dress, she decided. Taylor's was one of River Heights' finest stores. Nancy purchased several items for Hannah on the main floor, then went directly to the Mrs. Waring apparel section on the second floor. Usually Nancy had no trouble finding a sales clerk, but this particular morning seemed to be an especially busy one in the department, and an extra rush of customers had temporarily overwhelmed the sales force. Nancy sat down in a convenient chair to await her turn. Her thoughts wandered to the Turner sisters and little Judy. Would she be able to help them? She was suddenly brought out of her reverie by loud-voiced complaints. "We've been standing here nearly 10 minutes, a shrill voice declared. "Send a saleswoman to us immediately." Nancy turned to see Ada and Isabel Topham speaking to the floor manager. "I'm afraid I can't," the man replied regretfully. "There are a number of others ahead of you. All our salespeople are—" "Perhaps you don't know who we are," Ada interrupted rudely. "Indeed I do," the floor manager told her wearily. I will have a saleswoman here in a few moments if you'll only wait." "We're not accustomed to waiting," Isabel Topham told him icily. "Such service," Ada chimed in. "Do you realize that my father owns considerable stock in Taylor's? If we report your conduct to him, he could have you discharged." Customer service life. "I'm sorry," the harassed man apologized, "but it is a rule of the store. You must wait your turn." Ada tossed her head and her eyes flashed angrily. This did nothing to improve her looks. In spite of the expensive clothes she wore, Ada was not attractive. She was very thin and sallow with an expression of petulance. Now that her face was distorted with anger, she was almost ugly. Isabel, the pride of the Topham family, was rather pretty, but her face lacked character. She had acquired an artificially elegant manner of speaking, which, although irritating, was sometimes amusing. It was her mother's ambition that Isabel marry into a socially prominent family. I pity any future husband of hers, Nancy thought with a chuckle. Suddenly, Ada and Isabel saw Nancy, who nodded a greeting. Isabel coldly returned the nod, but Ada gave no indication she'd even noticed Nancy. At that moment, a saleswoman hurried toward the Topham sisters. At once they began to shower abuse upon the young woman for her failure to wait on them sooner. "What is it you wish to look at, Miss Topham?" the clerk said, flushing. "Evening dresses." The saleswoman brought out several dresses. Nancy watched curiously as the Tophams, in an unpleasant frame of mind, tossed aside beautiful models with scarcely a second glance. They found a fault with every garment. "This is a very chic gown," the saleswoman told them hopefully as she displayed a particularly attractive dress of lace and chiffon. "It arrived only this morning." Ada picked it up, gave the dress one careless glance, then tossed it into a chair as the distracted clerk went off to bring other frocks. The fluffy gown slipped to the floor in a crumpled mass. To Nancy's horror, Ada stepped on it as she turned to examine another dress. In disgust, Nancy went to pick it up. "Leave that alone!" Ada cried out, her eyes blazing. "Nobody asked for your help." "Are you buying this?" Nancy asked evenly. "It's none of your business." As Nancy continued to hold the dress, Ada, in a rage, snatched it from her hands, causing a long tear in the chiffon skirt. "Oh!" Isabel cried out. "Now you've done it! We'd better get out of here, Ada." "And why?" the haughty sister shrilled. "It was Nancy Drew's fault. She's always making trouble." "That was not my fault," Nancy said. "Come on, Ada," Isabel urged, "before that clerk gets back." Reluctantly, Ada followed Isabel out of the department. As they rushed toward a waiting elevator, Nancy gazed after them. At this moment, the saleswoman reappeared with an armful of lovely frocks. She stared in bewilderment at the torn dress. "Where did my customers go?" she asked Nancy worriedly. Nancy pointed toward the elevator but made no comment. Instead, she said, "I'm looking for an evening dress myself. This torn one is very pretty. Do you think that could be mended?" "Oh, I don't know," the woebegone clerk wailed. "I'll probably be held responsible, and I cannot afford to pay for that dress." "I'm sure tailors wouldn't ask you to do that," Nancy said kindly. "If there's any trouble, I'll speak to a manager myself. What usually happens is that such a dress is just greatly reduced." "Thank you," the clerk replied. "I'll call Miss Reed the fitter to see what can be done." "First, let me try on the dress," Nancy said, smiling. They found a vacant fitting room, and Nancy took off her suit and blouse. Then she slipped the lovely pale blue dance creation over her head, and the saleswoman zipped it up. "It's darling on you," she said enthusiastically. Nancy grinned. "I kind of like myself in it," she said. "Can you call the fitter?" Presently, Miss Reed, a gray-haired woman, appeared. Within seconds, she had made a change in an overlap of the chiffon skirt. The tear was no longer visible, and the style of the dress was actually improved. "I told our sales manager what happened," said the saleswoman. "If you want the dress, he'll reduce the price by 50%. "That's wonderful," Nancy exclaimed. Laughing, she said, "That price will fit into my budget nicely. I'll take the dress. Please send it." She gave her name and address. To herself, she added, "Ada Topham did me a favor, but if she ever finds out what happened, she'll certainly be burned up." Nancy suppressed a giggle. "It's been a real pleasure waiting on you, Miss Drew," the saleswoman said after Miss Reed left and Nancy was putting on her suit. But how I dread to see those Topham sisters come in here. They're so unreasonable, and they'll be even worse when they get Josiah Crowley's money." The woman lowered her voice. "The estate hasn't been settled, but the girls are counting on the fortune already. Last week I heard Ada say to her sister, 'Oh, I guess there's no question about our getting old Crowley's fortune. But I wish Father would stop worrying that somebody is going to show up with a later will which may do us out of it.'" Nancy was too discreet to engage in gossip with the saleswoman, but she was interested and excited about that information. The fact that Mr. Topham was disturbed indicated to her that he too suspected Josiah Crowley had made a second will. The conversation reminded Nancy of her date. She glanced at her wristwatch and saw it was after 12 o'clock. "I must hurry, or I'll be late for an appointment with my dad," she told the saleswoman. Nancy drove directly to her father's office. Although she was a few minutes ahead of the appointed time, she found he was ready to leave. "What luck, Dad?" Nancy asked eagerly. "Did Mr. Rolstead accept your luncheon invitation?" Yes, we're to meet him at the Royal Hotel in 10 minutes. Do you still think I should quiz him about the Crowley will?" "Oh, I'm more interested than ever in the case." She told her father about the saleswoman's gossipy remarks. Said Mr. Drew. "It's not what you'd call evidence, but the old saying usually holds good. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Come, let's go." The Royal Hotel was located less than a block away, and Nancy and her father quickly walked the distance. Mr. Rolstead was waiting in the lobby. Carson Drew introduced his daughter, then the three made their way to the dining room where a table had been reserved for them. At first, the conversation centered about a variety of subjects. As the luncheon progressed, the two lawyers talked enthusiastically of their college days together and finally of their profession. Nancy began to fear that the subject of the Crowley estate might never be brought up. Then after the dessert course, Mr. Drew skillfully turned the conversation into a new channel and mentioned some strange cases which he'd handled. "By the way," he said, "I haven't heard the details of the Crowley case. How are the Tophams making out? I understand other relatives are trying to break that will." For a moment, Mr. Rolstead remained silent. Was he reluctant to enter into a discussion of the matter? Nancy wondered. Finally, the lawyer said quietly, "The settlement of the estate wasn't given to me, Carson. But I confess, I followed it rather closely because of something that happened a year ago. As the present will stands, I do not believe it can be broken." "Then the Tophams fall heir to the entire estate," Mr. Drew commented. "Yes, unless a more recent will is discovered." Another will? Carson Drew inquired innocently. Then you believe Crowley made a second one? Mr. Rolstead hesitated as though uncertain whether or not he should divulge any further information. Then with a quick glance about, he lowered his voice and said, "Of course, this is strictly confidential." End of chapter 3. Is that a Karen? One of my favorite type of chair, a convenient chair. Had a nice weekend playing Nance in Animal Crossing. Nice. This book likes focusing on how pretty people are. Nancy's attractive, Carson is handsome, Topham sister's not attractive, even ugly. Nancy, first you hit Judy with your car, and now you rip dresses. I've never actually read a Nancy Drew book. Are they generally like the games? Yes. Well, okay, so all of the games are based on a book. Sometimes close-ish, sometimes not at all. Like, for instance, before I read this book on stream, I had read the book that The Curse of Blackmore Manor is based on, and the book, Nancy had multiple British boyfriends, there was lots of kissing, there was weed and cocaine throughout the book. It was very different than The Curse of Blackmore Manor, and it was like edgy 80s Nancy instead of like classic 1930s Nancy. So it depends, but some books are quite close. Like, I think that like Stay Tuned for Danger is fairly close to the book. What's another one? The final scene is kind of close, although it's Bess that gets kidnapped and not Maya. Simone in the book is actually a man named Simon. So there are like a few differences. They changed some things, but like some games are much closer to the book version than others. But that's why I've been reading them on stream to kind of like compare and contrast to see like what books are close, like what games are close to the book and which ones are not. I actually think, from what I understand, The Secret of the Old Clock is actually based on the first 4 books, because in the game, it's the Lilac Inn, which is book number 4. Like the inn that Jane and Emily are at is the Lilac Inn. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, that's for reals, Christy. I left Maya to die, so no big loss. So yeah. Hello, Nightmares. How are you? Alright, we got 3 more chapters. All right. Okay. Thanks for being here, Coley. See you in a bit. All right. 3 more chapters to go. Oh, no problem, Christy. Chapter 4, Racing the Storm. Confidential? Mr. Drew repeated, looking at Mr. Rolstead. You may rest assured that whatever you tell us will not be repeated to anyone. Well, I'll say this much, Mr. Rolstead went on. About a year ago, Josiah Crowley came to me and said he wanted to draw up a new will. He indicated he intended to spread out his bequests among several people. He expressed a desire to write the will himself and asked me a number of questions. I took him to my office and told him exactly how to proceed. When he left, he promised to have me look over the document after he'd drawn it up. Then you actually saw the will? Mr. Drew asked in surprise. No. Strange to say, Crowley never came back. I don't know whether he ever wrote that will or not. And if he did, there would be a chance that it would not be legal? Nancy spoke up. Yes, he might have typed it and signed the paper without a witness. In this state, at least 2 witnesses are required and 3 are advisable. What would happen, Nancy asked, if a person were ill or dying and had no witness and wanted to make a will? Mr. Rolstead smiled. That sometimes happens. If the person writes the will himself by hand and signs it so there's no doubt the same person did both, the surrogate office will accept it for probate. But then if Mr. Crowley wrote out and signed a new will, it would be legal, Nancy commented. That's right, but there's another thing to remember. It's pretty risky for someone who is not a lawyer to draw up a will that cannot be broken. Mr. Drew nodded. If Josiah Crowley left any loophole in a will he wrote personally, the Tophams would drag the matter into court. Yes, it's a foregone conclusion that the Tophams will fight to keep that fortune, whether they have a right to it or not. I believe some other relatives have filed a claim, but up to the moment they have no proof that a later will exists. Although Nancy gave no indication of her feelings, the possibility that Mr. Crowley had made a new will thrilled her. As soon as Mr. Drew paid the luncheon check, the 3 arose and left the dining room. Mr. Rolstead took leave of Nancy and her father in the lobby. Well, Nancy, did you find out what you wanted to know? Mr. Drew asked after the lawyer had left. Dad, it's just as I suspected. I'm sure Mr. Crowley did make a later will. He hid it someplace, if only I could find out where. It would be like looking for a needle in a haystack, Mr. Drew commented. I must figure out a way, Nancy said with determination. I want to help little Judy. She awoke the next morning thinking about the mystery. But where should she start hunting for possible clues to a second will? She continued pondering about it while she showered and dressed. As she entered the dining room, she was greeted with a cheery, "Good morning," from her father and Hannah Gruen. During breakfast, Mr. Drew said, Nancy, would you like to do a little errand for me this morning? Of course, Dad. I have a number of legal documents which must be delivered to Judge Hart at Masonville sometime before noon. I take them myself, but I have several important appointments. I'd appreciate it if you would drive over there with them. I'll be glad to go, Nancy promised willingly. Besides, it's such a wonderful day. I'll enjoy the trip. Where are the papers? At the office. You can drive me down and I'll get them for you. Nancy, wearing a yellow sunback dress and jacket, hurried away to get her gloves and handbag. Before Mr. Drew had collected his own belongings, she had brought the car from the garage and was waiting for him at the front door. I put the top down so I can enjoy the sun, she explained as her father climbed in. Good idea. I haven't heard you mention the Crowley case yet today, Mr. Drew teased as they rode along. Have you forgotten about it? Nancy's face clouded. No, I haven't forgotten, but I must admit I am stumped as to where to search for clues. Maybe I can help you. I've learned that the 2 girls on River Road who expected to be remembered in the will are named Hoover. You might look them up on your return trip. That's great. I'll watch the mailboxes for their name. When they reached the building where Mr. Drew had his office, Nancy parked the car and waited while her father went upstairs to get the legal documents to be delivered to Judge Hart. Returning a few minutes later, he placed a fat manila envelope in his daughter's hand. Give this to the judge. You know where to find him? Yes, Dad, in the Old Merchants Trust Company building. That's right. Selecting a recently constructed highway, Nancy rode along, glancing occasionally at the neatly planted fields on either side. Beyond were rolling hills. Pretty, she commented to herself. Oh, why can't all people be nice like this scenery and not make trouble? It was nearly 11 o'clock when she finally drove into Masonville. Nancy went at once to Judge Hart's office, but was informed he'd gone to the courthouse. Recalling that her father had mentioned the necessity of the papers being delivered before noon, she set off in search of the judge. Nancy had considerable trouble trying to see him, and it was 12 o'clock when at last she delivered the manila envelope into his hands. Thank you very much, he said. I'll need these directly after lunch. Nancy smiled. Then I'm glad I found you. When Judge Hart learned that Nancy was the daughter of Carson Drew, he at once insisted that she have lunch with him and his wife at their home before returning to River Heights. She accepted the invitation and spent a very pleasant hour with the Harts. During the meal, the judge laughingly asked if Nancy was still playing aid to her father. Oh, yes, she said, and at once told him about the Drews' interest in the Crowley case. Did you know Josiah Crowley or ever hear of him? She asked. Both the Harts nodded. A maid who used to be with them came to work for us after Mr. Crowley's death, the judge explained. Jane herself passed away a short time ago. We never met Josiah, Mrs. Hart added, but Jane pointed him out to my husband and me one time down on Main Street. Did he have relatives or friends in town? Nancy inquired. I think not, the judge replied. Nancy wondered what old Josiah had been doing in Masonville if he had no relatives or friends there. The town was not known as a spot for sightseeing. Her interest was further quickened when Mrs. Hart remarked that she had seen Mr. Crowley in town at another time also. How long ago was that? The girl asked. Mrs. Hart thought a minute, then replied, Oh, less than a year, I'd say. When luncheon was over, the judge said he must leave. Nancy told the Harts she too should go. She thanked them for their hospitality, then said goodbye. Soon she was driving homeward. Why had Mr. Crowley gone to Masonville? She asked herself. Could it have anything to do with a later will? Nancy had chosen a route which would take her to River Road. Half an hour later, she turned into the beautiful country road, which wound in and out along the Muskoka River, and began to look at the names on the mailboxes. Hoover, she reminded herself. About halfway to River Heights, while enjoying the pastoral scenes of cows standing knee-high in shallow sections of the stream, and sheep grazing on flower-dotted hillside, Nancy suddenly realized the sun had been blotted out. A thunderstorm's on the way, she told herself, glancing at black clouds scudding across the sky. I guess I better put the top of the car up. She pressed the button on the dashboard to raise the top, but nothing happened. Puzzled, Nancy tried again. Still, there was no response. By this time, large drops of rain had started to fall. I'll get soaked, Nancy thought, as she looked around. There was no shelter in sight, but ahead, past a steep rise, was a sharp bend in the road. Hopeful there would be a house or barn beyond, Nancy started the car again. Vivid forked lightning streaked across the sky. It was followed by an earth-shaking clap of thunder. The rain came down harder. Oh, why didn't I bring a raincoat? Nancy wailed. When Nancy swung around the bend, she was delighted to see a barn with lightning rods about a quarter-mile ahead. Farther on stood a small white house. I wonder if that's the Hoover's place, Nancy mused. By now the storm was letting loose in all its fury. The sky was as dark as night, and Nancy had to switch on her headlights to see the road. She was already thoroughly drenched, and her thought of shelter at this point was one of safety rather than of keeping dry. Nancy turned on the windshield wipers, but the rain was so blinding in its intensity it was impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Almost in an instant, the road had dissolved into a sea of mud. Nancy had been caught in a number of storms, but never one as violent as this. She feared a bad skid might land her in a ditch before she could reach the shelter of the barn. How much farther is it? She worried. It didn't seem this far away. The next instant, to Nancy's right, a ball of fire rocketed down from the sky. Oh, that was close, she thought fearfully. Her skin tingled from the electrical vibrations in the air. A moment later, a surge of relief swept over Nancy. At last, she breathed. At the side of the road, the barn loomed up. Its large double doors were wide open. Without hesitation, Nancy headed straight for the building and drove in. The next moment, she heard a piercing scream. End of chapter 4. Let's catch up. Nobody ever says nightmares when they see my name. How are you? Do you prefer me to call you something else? Just let me know. Some bad storming going on for sure, Super Riders. Stay safe. We had a tornado pass only like a mile north of my house at about 7:30 this morning. It was scary. Hi Hades, how are you? I just finished chapter 4. How many men has Nancy been seeing behind Ned's back this time? In this one, Nancy has this is actually the first Nancy Drew book. It was originally written in 1930 and revised in 1956. This is the 1956 version. Nancy has no boyfriend in this one. This is actually Nancy's first case. Hey, A-Rox, good morning. A ball of fire. Goodness gracious, great ball of fire. Yes, I'm happy I'm okay too. I am a pro at hurricanes, having lived on the coast for most of my life. I'm a pro at those. Those don't scare me because I know how to prepare for them and all of that. But I've never dealt with a tornado before, so that was very scary. Waking up to my phone blaring, "Tornado warning, seek shelter now," and Googling like where is it, and it's like literally right there, and I'm like, oh my god. So yeah, that was how I woke up this morning. It was not the most peaceful way to wake up. That's good. I'm glad I did, Disney. I have like a hair, like, there we go, I found it. Have you ever had like a hair over your face and you like can't really grasp it? You're like trying to find it and like you can feel it on your face, but I finally found it. Anyway. Yeah. 2 more chapters and we're only like an hour in to 12-hour stream. Yeah, exactly. That's what just happened to me. And I shed hair like a dog, so that happens to me often. I often have like hairs on my like sleeves, you know? These sheds, yeah. I got lots of hers and they come out of my head a lot. Okay, let's continue. Chapter 5, A Surprising Story. Nancy froze behind the wheel. Had she inadvertently hit someone? Her heart pounding in fright, she opened the car door to step out. At the same instant, a shadowy figure arose from a pile of hay near her. "I guess I must have scared you silly when I screamed," said a girl of Nancy's age, stepping forward. You're all right?" Nancy gasped. "Yes, and I'm sorry I yelled. I came out here to check on our supply of feed for the chickens. I didn't think it was going to be a bad storm, so I didn't bother to go back to the house." "It's pretty bad," said Nancy. "Well, the storm terrified me," the girl continued. "I didn't hear your car coming, and when it rushed in here, I panicked." Nancy began to breathe normally again, then told the stranger her name, and the fact that the mechanism for raising the top of the convertible was not working. "That's a shame," said the girl, "and you must get your clothes dried. The storm's letting up. Let's dash over to the house. Grace will help you, too. She's my sister. My name's Allison Hoover." Hoover! Nancy was tempted to tell Allison she'd been planning to call, but she decided not to mention it at the moment. It might be better to do her sleuthing more subtly. Nancy smiled at Allison. "Thanks a million, but first I'd like to wipe out the car. Are there any rags around the barn?" Allison produced several, and together the 2 girls mopped the water from the cushions and floor. By this time the rain had stopped. As Allison and Nancy sloshed through a series of puddles to the farmhouse, Nancy had a better chance to study her companion. She was tall, with reddish blonde hair and very fair skin. Her voice was musical, and she had an attractive, lilting laugh. The girls reached the rundown farmhouse and stamped the mud from their shoes on the back porch. Then Allison flung open the door, and they entered a cheerful kitchen. As the door shut behind them, another girl who was just closing the oven of an old-fashioned range turned toward them in surprise. "Grace, I've brought a visitor," Allison said quickly. "Nancy, I want you to meet my sister. She's the mainstay of our family of 2. Grace Hoover cordially acknowledged the introduction and greeted Nancy with a warm smile. Nancy judged her to be at least 4 years older than Allison. Her face was rather serious, and it was evident from her manner that responsibility had fallen on her shoulders at an early age. Nancy was attracted to both girls and responded to their friendly welcome. She put on a robe which Allison brought her, and Grace hung her wet clothes near the range. Presently, Grace pulled an ironing board from a closet with the intention of pressing Nancy's garments, but Nancy would not hear of this and began to iron them herself. "This is fun," she said to the sisters. "I don't know what I would have done without you girls." "It's great for us," Allison spoke up. "We don't have much company." "To tell you the truth, we can't afford it." Grace stepped to the stove, removed a golden brown cake from the oven, and set it on the table to cool. "But today we're not talking about money. It's Allison's birthday, and this is a birthday cake. Nancy, if you're not in too much of a hurry, I wish you'd join us in a little celebration." "I'd love to," Nancy said. "Grace's cakes are yummy," Allison declared. "I'm not much of a cook myself. My department is taking care of the barns and the chickens." Soon Nancy finished pressing her clothes and put them back on. Meanwhile, the cake had cooled, and Nancy and Grace started to spread the chocolate frosting. "Suppose you 2 go into the living room and wait," she suggested. "I'll bring in cake and tea." Nancy followed Allison to the adjoining room. Although it was comfortable, the room did not contain much furniture. The floor had been painted and was scantily covered with handmade rag rugs. With the exception of an old-fashioned sofa, an inexpensive table, a few straight-backed chairs, and an old oil stove which furnished heat in cold weather, there was little else in the room. However, dainty white curtains covered the windows, and Nancy realized that although the Hoovers were poor, they had tried hard to make their home attractive. Allison nodded. Grace and I have been living here since Father died. That was 2 years ago. Mother passed away just before that, the girl added with a slight catch in her voice. Their illnesses took every penny we had. I'm terribly sorry, Nancy remarked sympathetically. It must be dreadfully hard for 2 girls to run the farm by themselves. Our farm isn't as large as it once was, Allison said quietly. We only have a few acres left. I know you're too polite to ask how we manage, Nancy. Grace helps a dressmaker at Masonville whenever she can get work. She makes all her own clothes, and mine too, and I raise chickens. From just beyond the doorway suddenly came the strains of Happy Birthday to You, Happy Birth. By this time, Nancy had joined in. She and Grace finished, Day to You, Happy Birthday, dear Allison, Happy Birthday to you. Grace set the cake with 18 lighted candles on the table. She and Nancy sang the second verse with the words, May you have many more. Tears stood in Allison's eyes. When the song ended, she grasped her sister in a tremendous hug. Then she gave Nancy one. This is the nicest birthday I've had in years, she quavered. And it's one of the most enjoyable I've ever attended, Nancy said sincerely. Suddenly Allison began to sing a tuneful old English ballad about the birthday of a village lass. Nancy listened, entranced by Allison's clear bell-like tones. When she finished, Nancy applauded, then said, That was perfectly lovely. You have a beautiful voice, Allison. The singer laughed gaily. Thank you, Nancy. I've always wanted to take lessons, but as you know, voice training's pretty expensive. At that moment, Grace brought in a tray of fragrant tea. As she poured 3 cups, Allison blew out the candles and served the cake. I've never tasted anything more delicious in all my life, Nancy said enthusiastically. The 3 girls chatted like old friends. Finally, the sun broke through the clouds. As Nancy rose to leave, she noticed an unusual picture on the wall opposite her and commented on its beauty. Uncle Josiah Crowley gave it to us, Allison told her. If he were only alive now, things would be different. At the mention of the name, Nancy sat down again. Was she going to pick up a clue to the possibility that Mr. Crowley had made a later will? He wasn't really our uncle, Grace explained, but we loved him as much as though he were a relative. Her voice broke, and for a moment she could not go on. Then, gaining control of herself, she continued. He lived on the farm next to us. That was when Mother and Father were alive. All of Allison's and my misfortunes seemed to come at once. He was the dearest man you ever saw, Allison added. Some people thought him queer, but you never minded his peculiar ways after you knew him. Uncle Josiah was very good to us. He always told me that he'd back me in a singing career. Yes, Grace added. Uncle Josiah used to say Allison sang as sweetly as a bird, and he wanted to pay for lessons with a famous teacher. But after he went to live with the Tophams, he never said any more about it. He never liked it with the Tophams, though, Allison declared. They weren't kind to him, and he used to slip away to visit us. Uncle Josiah often said that we seemed like his own children. Grace spoke up. He brought us many nice gifts, but we loved him for himself and not his money. I remember, though, the very last day we saw him alive, he told us, I have planned a big surprise to make you girls happy, but I can't tell you now what it is. You'll see it in my will. Those were his very words. And then the Tophams got everything, Allison said. He must have changed his mind for some reason. It's hard to believe he would forget his promise to us, Grace said sadly. Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if a later will could be found? Allison exclaimed. Yes, Nancy replied slowly. I've heard that Mr. Crowley told other people he was leaving money to them. The Turner sisters, for instance. Do you know them? Slightly, Grace answered. My dad, Nancy went on, is a lawyer, and he and I are very interested in this case. He even mentioned you girls, and to tell the truth, I was on my way here to talk to you. Allison impulsively grasped Nancy's arm. You say your father's a lawyer? Grace and I are positive Uncle Josiah made a later will. If we could only engage your father to help us prove this. Then a sad look came over her face. I'm forgetting. We wouldn't have any money to pay him if we should lose the case. Don't let that worry you. said Nancy kindly. "This is your birthday, and you must be happy, Allison. My special wish for you is that before you're 1 year older, you'll inherit some of the Crowley money so you can take those singing lessons." End of chapter 5. I need a haircut big time now. Just shave your head. It's fine. It'll probably grow back before the world is back to normal. You and me both. For realsies. Nancy, way to lie. Nicest birthday. Psh, the big surprise was his death. No kidding. The book is going by so fast. I don't like this song very much. It's so strange to me. Thank you for the claps. Nancy, you said the wish out loud. Thank you for clapping. One more chapter, and I'm definitely going to finish before 11 a.m. So I'm probably going to take a small break to maybe get a snack, and I'll probably start Tangle Tower early today. All right, we're going to jump into chapter 6 and call it there for the day on book reading, obviously, and we'll move on to the next thing. Chapter 6, An Exciting Appointment. The Hoover girls walked out to the barn with Nancy. "Do come see us again," Grace called as the young detective climbed into her car. "Yes, please do," Allison added. Nancy promised that she would. "As soon as I have some news," she said. Although the weather had cleared, the river road remained muddy and slippery. Nancy found it necessary to drive with extreme care for the next 2 miles until she reached the main highway. No wonder this river road isn't used much, she thought. And how did Grace and Allison get to town? Nancy wondered. She had not seen a car at the Hoover home and knew that no bus passed their door. I certainly wish, she thought, that I or somebody else could locate a later will of Josiah Crowley's by which the Hoovers and the Turners would receive some much-needed money. I have to tell Dad about this latest development. She decided to see if her father was in his office and drove directly there. Nancy parked the car in a nearby lot. She surveyed the convertible ruefully as she climbed out. Poor thing, it certainly needs a bath. Nancy found Mr. Drew in. As she entered his private office, he arose from the desk chair to kiss her. "I'm glad you're here, and safe," the lawyer said. "I was worried about you when that violent storm came up. When Hannah phoned me that you weren't back, I began to regret I'd sent you on that errand." His daughter grinned. "I'm back, all in one piece. I delivered the papers to Judge Hart and learned that he and his wife saw Mr. Crowley in Masonville a couple of times. Also, I talked to the Hoover girls." She described her meeting with Allison and Grace Hoover and ended by asking her father if he could help them. "From what you say, it does look as though Josiah Crowley might have made another will which included them as beneficiaries," Mr. Drew commented thoughtfully. "I'll be glad to do anything I can to help the Hoover girls." He asked whether the sisters had given Nancy any specific information about Mr. Crowley's habits or other clues. When Nancy shook her head, Mr. Drew suggested that she invite the girls to his office for a little conference. "Perhaps if I ask them some questions, it will recall helpful incidents." The lawyer studied his desk calendar for a moment, then looked up at his daughter. "How about tomorrow afternoon at 2:45? I can give them about half an hour." For answer, Nancy gave her father a hug and then asked if she might use his telephone to call the Hoovers at once. Grace and Allison eagerly accepted the Drews' invitation, and Nancy said she would drive out to bring them to the conference and take them home afterward. "You're a doll!" cried Allison, who had answered the telephone. "Nancy, I just know you're going to solve this mystery." Suddenly an idea came to Nancy. She asked Allison how long the girls would be able to stay in River Heights. "Oh, as long as you need us," Allison replied. "Good. Then I'd like you both to stay and have supper with us," Nancy said. "Sorry I can't join you," Mr. Drew told his daughter as she hung up. "I have a dinner engagement and conference in the evening." Just then the mayor of River Heights was shown into the lawyer's office, and Nancy arose to leave. She spoke to the mayor for a moment, then said, "See you later, Dad." Before Nancy returned home, she stopped at an old-fashioned house on a side street. It was the home of Signora Mascani, a famous voice teacher who had retired to the small city the year before, but took a few outstanding pupils. Nancy introduced herself to the white, bushy-haired, florid-faced man, then said, "Signor Mascani." Muscagni? Would you be willing to listen to the voice of a friend of mine and give your honest opinion as to whether or not she might become a great singer? If she might, she can obtain the money for lessons. If she might, and she can obtain the money for lessons, would you be able to take her as a pupil? Signor Mascagni studied Nancy for several minutes before replying. Finally, he said, "You do not look like the kind of girl who would come here on a foolish errand. Ordinarily, I do not accept beginners, but in this case I would be willing to hear your friend sing." He laughed. "Mind you, I will give you nothing but the truth, and if your friend does not measure up, I hope her feelings will not be hurt too deeply." Nancy laughed too. "I like honesty," she said. "As a matter of fact, this girl knows nothing about what I'm asking you. Coming here will be a complete surprise to her. I'm probably no judge of voices, but I think she's a natural. However, we will both appreciate having your opinion and will certainly abide by it." She arranged for a meeting the following afternoon at 4 o'clock and left Signor Mascagni's house in an excited mood. "Maybe I'm going way out on a limb," Nancy mused, "but this is another one of those hunches of mine that Dad talks about, and I have to carry through."
Happy Twitch anniversary.
When she picked up the Hoovers the following day, Nancy did not mention the appointment with the voice teacher. The three girls went directly to Mr. Drew's office, and at once he began to quiz Grace and Allison about Mr. Crowley. "I understand that he was a rather eccentric man," the lawyer began. "Suppose you tell me everything you can remember about what Josiah Crowley did and what he said, which would help us figure out where he might have secreted a later will." Secreted? A later will. "Uncle Josiah was rather absent-minded," Grace spoke up. "I often saw him hunting for his spectacles, which he had pushed up on his head." "Did he ever hide things?" Mr. Drew asked. "Oh, yes," Allison laughed. "Uncle Josiah was always putting articles away in what he called a safe place, but the places were so safe he never could find the things again." "Then," Nancy spoke up excitedly, "Mr. Crowley could have hidden a will and then forgotten where." "I suppose so," Grace replied. "While living with the Tophams, I'm sure that's just what he would have done. One day when he was calling at our house, he talked about the Tophams and the way they were trying to get all his money. 'I guess they think, just because I stay on, that they're going to get everything, but they'll be fooled when they find I've made another will,' he said with that odd little chuckle of his. 'This time I'm not going to trust it to any lawyer. I'll put it away in a place that I know it will be safe.'" Allison asked Mr. Drew, "Do you think Uncle Josiah hid another will somewhere in the Tophams' house?" The lawyer looked down at his desk for several seconds before replying. "If he did, we would have a great fight on our hands, I'm afraid, trying to persuade the Tophams to let us make a search." Another idea had come to Nancy, and she shuddered at the idea. Perhaps the Tophams had been alerted by all the talk of a later will, and searched for it, discovered one, and by now destroyed it. She flashed her father a questioning look, and got the impression that he had the same thought. But there was no point in discouraging the Hoover girls in telling them this. Mr. Drew continued to question the sisters until 3:30, then said he had another appointment. He would do all he could to help the girls and would not charge them for his services. "Unless they bring results," he added with a smile. "You're very kind, just like your daughter," said Grace as she arose and shook hands with the lawyer. "You have no idea how much Allison and I appreciate what you're doing for us." When the three girls reached Nancy's car, she told the sisters she wanted them to meet someone special in town and drove directly to Signor Mascagni's home. As they went up to the front porch, they could hear the sounds of a soprano voice singing an aria from Tosca. "How beautiful!" Allison exclaimed softly. The girls were admitted by a maid and asked to wait in a small room while Signor Mascagni's pupil finished her lesson. Puzzled, Allison waited for Nancy to explain. "I have a surprise for you," Nancy said with a grin. "Signor Mascagni has promised to listen to your voice. If you pass the test, he'll consider taking you as a pupil after we find the money for voice lessons." Allison was too dumbfounded to speak, but Grace cried out, "Oh, Nancy, what are you going to do next? We've known you only 24 hours, and you've already boosted our morale sky high." At this moment, the door to the studio opened. The young soprano came out, followed by Signor Mascagni. He said goodbye to his pupil, then invited the three callers into the studio. Nancy quickly introduced the Hoover sisters. "And you are the singer," the man said almost at once, addressing Allison. "I can tell from your speaking voice." Apparently the teacher sensed that Allison had been taken by surprise and was a little nervous. Accordingly, he began to talk on other subjects than music. He showed the girls several paintings in the room and pieces of statuary which had come from Italy. "I prize them highly," he said. "They're exquisite," Allison remarked. Signor Maschiani walked to a rear window and pointed out a lovely garden in back of the house. Then, evidently satisfied that Allison was at ease, he led the way to the grand piano and sat down. "Now, what would you like to sing?" he asked Allison with a smile. "Please stand right here, facing me." "Something very simple," she replied. "America the Beautiful?" The teacher nodded and asked her what key she would like it played in, then began to accompany her. Allison sang as though inspired. Her voice sounded even more beautiful than it had in the farmhouse, Nancy thought. When Allison finished the song, Signor Maschiani made no comment. Instead, he asked her to try a scale, then to sing single tones, jumping from octave to octave. "You have a very fine range, Miss Hoover," was his only comment. For half an hour, he had Allison try short songs in various keys, and at one point joined with her in a duet. At last, he turned around on the piano bench and faced Nancy and Grace. "I believe," he said slowly, "I believe that some day we shall know Allison Hoover as an operatic star." Before the girls could say anything, he jumped up and turned to shake Allison's hand fervently. By this time, the full import of his words had dawned on the young singer. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. "Bravissimo, bravissimo," he exclaimed. "You sing, you cry, you smile, magnifico! You will also be a dramatic actress splendida." Nancy and Grace were nearly on the verge of tears also, and they were so overwhelmed by the happy news. Then suddenly the three girls became serious, remembering that there was still the problem of money for lessons from this great man. They knew his fee per hour must be very high. Allison suddenly began to talk and poured out her whole story to the white-haired teacher. "But I know," she declared with a brave smile, "that somehow I'm going to get the money for the lessons, and I wouldn't want to take them from anybody but you, Signor Maschiani. I'll come back to you just as soon as I can. Thank you very, very much. Please, girls, I'd like to leave now." As Allison rushed toward the front door, Signor Maschiani detained Nancy and Grace. "This Allison, she is wonderful," he exclaimed. "I want to give her lessons to see that her training is correct." He threw up his hands and shook his head. "But I cannot afford to give the lessons free. Perhaps I could cut my price." "We'll find the money somehow, Signor," Nancy promised. Then she and Grace thanked the teacher and followed Allison outside. At the Drew home that evening, there were mixed emotions on everyone's part. Hannah Gruen had taken a great fancy to the Hoover sisters on the news of Allison's talent, and the news of Allison's talent had thrilled her as well as the girls. Conversation at supper was gay and animated. Nancy and Mrs. Gruen drove the sisters to their farm, and on parting, Nancy again promised to do all she could to help find a will from which the girls might possibly benefit. But figuring out how to do this became a problem that seemed insurmountable to Nancy. At breakfast the following day, Mr. Drew suggested, "Nancy, perhaps if you'd give your mind a little rest from the Crowley matter, an inspiration about the case may come to you." His daughter smiled. "Good idea, Dad. I think I'll take a walk in the fresh air and clear the cobwebs from my brain." As soon as she finished eating, Nancy set out at a brisk pace. She headed for River Heights Attractive Park to view the display of roses, which was always very beautiful. She had gone only a short distance along one of the paths when she caught sight of Isabel and Ada Topham seated on a bench not far ahead. "They're the last people in the world I want to see right now," Nancy thought. "They'll probably say something mean to me and I'll lose my temper. When I think how Grace and Allison and the Turners could use just 1/10 of the Crowley money, which the Tophams are going to inherit, I could just burst." Nancy had paused, wondering whether she should turn back. "No," she told herself, "I'll go on to see the roses. I'll take that path back of the Tophams and they won't notice me." Nancy made her way along quietly with no intention of eavesdropping on the two girls, but suddenly 2 words of their conversation came to her ears, bringing Nancy to an involuntary halt. She had distinctly heard Isabel say, "the will." In a flash, Nancy's detective instincts were aroused and her heart pounded excitedly. "It must be Josiah Crowley's will they're talking about," she reasoned. End of chapter 6. End of book stream portion. Let me catch up on chat. Already thinking about taking a break, only a little more than an hour in. Goodness, I am hungry. My stomach's kind of growling. I'll be glad to do anything I can help to the Hoover girls for a 20% cut of the will payment. Best friend, thank you so much for the resub. Secreted, yeah. I said it like secreted, and it made me think of like ooze, something oozing, and I was like, I don't think that's right. Secreted, I think, is right. Thank you for shouting out Holland. That's okay. It's okay. I'm glad you're here. I hope this storm isn't too bad on your side. I know it was pushing toward the coast. We had a scary morning. What would you like to sing? Chandelier in the Key of Toad. Highway to Hell. Nancy not focusing entirely on a case? That sounds legit. Alright, so this is what I'm gonna do. Oh, okay. Okay. So I'm going to look up some music for... I don't know if Tangle Tower has any music on YouTube. Let's see. Oh, shoot. I don't think it does. Nope, there's just walkthroughs. Okay, well then I'm just gonna keep playing some Nancy Drew music. And I'm gonna take a quick break. I'm just gonna get me some foods. Yeah, I'm gonna get me some foods, take my mug down, get it something to drink, and then when I get back, we will start early on Tangle Tower, and we'll just tack on an extra 30 minutes to Tangle Tower. So I'll see you guys back in a few minutes. Don't go anywhere. Thanks for hanging out with me.